90 days after you sell your business, you could be playing golf, answering the phone once a week, and never working as hard as you ever worked prior to selling your business. Or you could work 5 years harder than you ever worked prior to selling your business. Same buyer, same price, same deal structure. But what makes the difference? How do you avoid the golden handcuffs after selling your company? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today in this video. 3 things and 1 bonus to avoid the golden handcuffs of the post-transaction transition. I'm Arthur Petropoulos, Managing Partner and President here at Hillview Partners. We're a lower middle market investment banking firm, helping companies typically generating $1 million to $20 million a year in pre-tax earnings or EBITDA to sell their companies and to secure capital. And so you are selling your company. You have the price, you've worked through diligence, you're finally getting to the point of selling the business. But what pops up? The discussion around your transition, the discussion around your post-transaction involvement, your continued encouragement, stewardship of the business. But you thought you were selling your business. You thought this was going to be done. This was the next chapter of life. The whole reason why you're selling your company is you don't want to be doing as much stuff as you have been. Yet, all of a sudden, now it's becoming part of the deal. Now it's becoming an obligation. Now, all of a sudden, 5 years in Monaco is going to be 5 years in a Siberian gulag, doing all the things you wanted to not be doing. How do you avoid this? How do you surface this? How do you avoid even leaving it to this stage of the process, wondering, okay, when is this going to get talked about? When are we going to actually determine this? When are we going to hash this out? How do we figure this out? Well, the goal has to get addressed long before. Part of going out and getting a deal negotiated, and why you want to hire an investment banker, is because price isn't the only variable. There's 4 things we always talk about in a deal: price, structure, transition, and stakeholders. How much someone's paying for the company, how much is at closing, what's after closing, what are the contingencies, variables, terms, triggers, etc. Transition. How long do you have to keep working, and what are your roles, duties, responsibilities? 4th, what happens to the employees, and how do you take care of them as well? Today's video, transition is the variable that we're going to be primarily focusing on. And again, how do you get the optimal transition? How do you minimize the time, minimize the responsibility, minimize the burden and stress on a post-transaction basis versus a long, lengthy, obligatory time period that you have to stay involved? Well, that's what we want to jump into right now. So the first thing you want to do, and this again is something that you have done as part of selling the business, such that you can ask for the shorter transition and you can negotiate for it, is have processes of the company clearly laid out in a way that minimizes your role in them. But you're going to say, but I am involved with the business in some way. Well, so is everybody, particularly at companies in the $1 to $20 million EBITDA range. So if you say, well, my hands are not completely out of sales, my hands are not completely out of the execution of the fulfillment, my hands are not completely out of hiring and firing, don't worry about it. Don't lose sleep over it, because there is no such thing as a passive business unless you own shares in a stock or bonds. But particularly within the lower middle market, there's the expectation that you're going to have some level of involvement. And that, again, does not prohibit a tapering or very short transition period. It just has to be characterized the right way, has to be clearly understood. Again, the clearer the explanation, the lower the risk to the buyer, the more willing they are to allow you to kind of exit the scene after the transaction takes place. And so when you think of processes, sales, execution, operations. How do you get customers and pull them through the process? How do you provide the services, the execution, the fulfillment? How do you hire, fire, pay, support the company's general operations? If your role at the time of the sale is effectively just kind of spearheading certain strategy, well, that is the role that the buyer is typically going to step into. And so as long as you're not the one kind of chopping the wood, digging the holes entirely, right, and you can point to the processes in place, there's other people that can be trained up, things of that nature, and we'll get to that in the second point relative to people. But for the first point, if there's processes in place that someone else can readily understand, it will minimize or support the minimization of the transition time period. Now, the second, as we alluded to, are having people that do things that are not you. More specifically, we call this the next layer of management. And so at the time of selling a business, you want to be the strategic steward of the business, the one kind of pointing the direction that the ship is going to go. And again, you can have your hands in some parts of sales. Maybe you're kind of the ultimate closer that they pull out of the bullpen when they really need you on a sales pitch. Or maybe you're kind of giving a little bit of kind of massaging to the execution process to make sure that the results and the outcomes for your clients hit the way you need to. And maybe you kind of step into 1 or 2 interviews for people just to give them a sense that the company still kind of has its essence. And those are all good things, but those can easily be kind of weaned down. They can be tapered away and can be replaced with other people, or let's not just say replaced, but that the next layer of management can be elevated upward. And so if the next layer of management is largely managing sales, is largely managing execution, is largely managing operations, then the natural progression of them is not something that seems uncanny or unbelievable to a buyer. And therefore, if you were to paint the picture that we have that next layer of management and they're trained and they have the expectation to be doing these things, then that natural progression for them just feels like the ordinary next step. It's not something crazy. Again, you're not just saying, oh, let's get the intern out of the boiler room and he or she can now run sales, right? It can't be abrupt. It has to be, no, these people have all been doing these jobs for a decade. Now we want to get them to the next level. Because candidly, that is what the buyer wants as well. They don't want someone who's kind of looking towards retirement to be running any of the operations of the business. And so if you can paint that path for them, it's going to naturally support your transition, minimize kind of the intensity of it as well. Number 3, tying numbers 1 and 2 together, is a transition path. So from a process standpoint, you are saying, we have processes in place that largely can operate without me. Number 2, we have people in place that have the ability to elevate and start to take over some of these roles such that the owner or the seller can transition out of the business more expediently. And number 3 is having the actual path or having the plan. Now, if someone were to say, okay, thank you, now how do we get from A to B? And you say, I don't know, right? They're going to say, well, you're going to be really helpful in us figuring that out. And you're going to sit here and you're going to help us do that. And you're going to be our insurance policy. Or, you know, the joke used to be, you're going to be the schmuck insurance to make sure that we can actually figure that out without a problem. However, if you say, we have a plan as to how that's going to take place. So-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so are going to elevate to these roles. They are then going to do a bit more of this process, a bit more of that process. Again, it doesn't have to be the map to find Atlantis, but it does have to be a general blueprint as to how this next step is going to take place and how these things are going to happen. Again, that should be kind of tracking the same elements relative to processes. That should be tracking the same elements as to people. And if there are product evolutions, if you will, or new ways that the solutions or services that you provide are expected to evolve in the future as well, having a path relative to those things as well can certainly be helpful in, I think, instilling more confidence to the buyer. So to recap these 3 things, before we get to kind of the last secret, or the thing that will really tip the scale in your advantage. Number 1, have clear processes laid out that don't entirely involve you. They can involve you to a degree, but not entirely. Number 2, have the next layer of management clearly defined such that they can take up more of the things that you are doing. And number 3, tying numbers 1 and 2 together, have a clear path, have a blueprint, show exactly how this should happen over, again, this, call it a 90-day period, as we'll get to towards the end of this video as to why the 90 days is important. And then number 4, or kind of the secret to all of this, or tying it together and getting people to really believe it, have some element of proof. You don't have to completely kind of push the kid on the bike down the street and say, okay, I hope he doesn't hit a car. But you do have to attempt, at least along the path towards selling a business, to get some proof points to say, you know what, I went away for 2 weeks to Greece and I saw that it still functioned and it still worked the right way. Or, you know what, I gave it 2 weeks, or we gave it this month and we really saw how things worked. And if you have proof, proof is undeniable, right? People can have opinions about your opinions. They believe that you really believe what you say, but, you know, as the Dostoevsky quote goes, you can be sincere and still be stupid. But proof is undeniable. If you have proof that it has worked or that it can work, because there's some time period in which it did work, then all of those other things become somewhat irrefutable. And so how does this all tie together? Well, if you are negotiating the transition period, as we do for all of our clients, if we can clearly crystallize and delineate that there are processes, that there are people in the next layer of management, that there's a path forward, and there's some element of proof that this has already worked in the instances where it's been attempted to work, then what we can do is try to get the magic that we call the tapering year. Not 5 years, not 4 years, not 3 years, not 2 years, the tapering year of transition. And what do we mean by tapering year? 90 days in the same capacity, the same level of intensity that you were working kind of pre-transaction to hand things over. And then after those 90 days, next 90 days are, maybe coming into the office once a week to check on some stuff and have a meeting. The next 90 days are maybe having a once a week Zoom meeting or scheduled phone call. And the next 90 days, kind of the fourth 90-day quarter of the year, picking up the phone when people call you. Look, what we find is that owners or sellers of a business, they want it to succeed. They will pick up the phone if there's a question, a concern, a constraint point to be resolved. However, they don't want to continue working in the same level of intensity that they were prior to selling the business. The whole point of selling the business for most people who are 50 years and older, or they don't want to work at the same level of intensity that they have for the decades beforehand. They want to monetize what they've built. They want to see that the company is in the right hands and has the next season of life, but then they also want to have their next season of life. And whatever that means they're going to do with their life and whatever their next kind of pursuit or mission is, they want to get there. And so the shorter the transition time, the less golden handcuffs that there are, the better it's going to be for everybody. And so for all of our clients that we work with, we want to solve for that variable, which can be one of the, again, key variables. I think everybody always talks about price in deals, but again, price, structure, transition, stakeholders. And within transition, short time frame, low intensity, and it will tie into the structure of things where we don't want a whole lot of structure of a deal that goes beyond someone's involvement. That's a story for a different video. However, how to optimize the transition time, how to get yourself a golden parachute more than golden handcuffs, boils down to these things. So that's the thought for today. Hope the week's going well for everyone. Keep pushing forward. God bless. We'll see everyone next time.